My name is Laura Miller. I'm 42, and I'm a forensic accountant. For decades, I've lived and breathed numbers, charts, and reports, uncovering frauds that often seemed invisible to the naked eye. I believed my world, one of logic and precision, was a safe haven, until the day that audit revealed my certainties were threatened. At first, the finances seemed stable, but as I delved deeper, small discrepancies began to emerge like shadows on the computer screen. Transactions that didn't add up, misappropriated funds, documents that mimicked legitimate patterns but reeked of fabrication. My professional rigor taught me to be suspicious of these minute flaws. These weren't simple errors. They were surgical cuts in a plot designed to bring me down. In that silent room, with the cursor blinking on the screen in front of me, I perceived a meticulous sabotage. Every piece of information pointed to the same hand. Robert, a resentful ex-boss, frustrated by my leaving my job to raise my family. He, along with Carla, my sister and close rival, were secretly orchestrating, or rather, subtly maneuvering within the numbers, an operation to sideline me. I stayed calm. The rage that could have consumed me gave way to a precise coldness, grounded in honed technique. This wasn't a time for uncontrolled emotions, but for investigating every leak, scanning every line until the complete picture came into focus. My mind worked like a methodical engine, analyzing, correlating, cross-referencing data. I looked for patterns. I mentally reinforced the maxim that guides my work. In fraud, nothing is completely hidden. You just have to know where and how to look. The misappropriated transactions followed disguised routes through shell accounts, simulated interest, and cloned movements. An expertly orchestrated operation, but not foolproof. They tried to push me out of the market, believing I would give in. They forgot this was my turf, I thought, feeling the confidence that comes from a deep mastery of my field. Every number, every document became part of my weapon. My hands didn't tremble. My eyes remained alert and implacable. A silent battle unfolded, in which I wouldn't be the victim. The wisdom gained throughout my career was my ally. I knew that what seemed like a simple fraud was, in fact, part of a larger scheme, a game of power and sabotage where my name was at stake. Remembering Robert's previous attacks and Carla's veiled attempts, I realized how much they had underestimated my perseverance and, above all, my knowledge. This wasn't just a financial or professional matter. It was about regaining control, protecting my legacy and my reputation. Meticulously, I collected evidence, mapping this plot. Transaction by transaction, I built the foundation of my retaliation, knowing that every decision I made at that moment would determine my survival in this hostile environment. The silence of the room held my concentration, and the cold light of the monitor reflected in my eyes the gleam of determination. They thought they'd bring me down. Little did they know the game was just beginning, and I was ready to turn every piece of this chessboard to my advantage. At that moment, I reaffirmed to myself, this was my turf, and I would defend every inch with the coldness and precision only a forensic accountant can offer. As I delved deeper into the analysis of the suspicious transactions, my thoughts naturally turned to my sister Carla, a complex figure in my life, intertwined by blood ties and the shadow of a rivalry that had lasted for years. We grew up together, but never side by side. While I found refuge in discipline, detail, and meticulousness, she excelled in natural charisma, easily navigating social circles and winning allies with a simple smile. This difference, which could have been complementary, became an invisible and cruel barrier. Carla always seemed eager to overshadow me, not with the same technical expertise, of course, but with an innate ability to manipulate people and context to her advantage. Within the family, her smiles hid acidic comments. In family business, her ambition was veiled behind a facade of impeccable professionalism, but carried a clear envy. In retrospect, I realized that many moments served as silent signs of her intention to push me away, to undermine my authority and credibility. The recent divorce was a blow she didn't miss the chance to exploit. For Carla, that apparent fragility was the perfect opportunity to consolidate her power, hoping that I would succumb to the silent blows that she and Robert, the ex-boss who harbored resentment over my decision to leave my old job to take care of my family, were plotting in cahoots. The duo proved to be a negative alliance, capable of hiding behind appearances and orchestrating veiled attacks, using the company structure to target me. However, I knew that Carla was waiting, anxiously, for my mistake, for my downfall. She underestimated my ability to persist, my professional competence, and above all, my emotional discipline. From a young age, I learned to transform pressure into strength, to channel discomfort and doubts into avenues for overcoming challenges. The meticulousness that guided my work outside of reports also guided my steps in my personal life. Control, planning, and resilience. In our interactions, whether in family meetings or in the corporate environment, I noticed the underlying tension, the subtleties of words that carried more meaning than they seemed. Carla was building a network, discreet alliances, carefully crafted friendships to ensure her intentions were met. And although I was aware of this, I was never caught off guard. Because days and nights of study, analysis, and experience taught me to read between the lines, to investigate what was hidden behind the facades. It was in this combination of past and present, of frustration, rivalry, but also of memory and learning, that I found fuel for my persistence. This wasn't just about defending a position or resolving a financial fraud. It was about protecting my personal and professional legacy, about reclaiming the dignity they were trying to destroy. Each meticulous clue I uncovered in the transactions chipped away at this larger conflict, my weapon being both technical and emotional. The metaphor that came to mind was clear. Carla and I were in a chess match where, while she moved pieces with social skill, I commanded the game of precision, observation, and anticipation. She relied on influence, I on structured knowledge. And this difference gave me the confidence that I wouldn't be defeated by the shadow of family betrayal. The silence of my office, illuminated only by the cold glow of the monitor, became the stage for my determination. Each figure, each document, became a crucial piece, a piece of evidence I aligned to assemble the definitive dossier. Courage didn't come from wounded pride, but from the certainty that to win this dispute, I had to remain methodical and focused, maintaining the composure my profession demands. As fragments of the past joined recent data, my strategy took shape. This intimate confrontation, marked by old resentments and the power struggle, wouldn't be won by shouting or direct confrontations, but by the sum of persistence, analysis, and the emotional intelligence I had cultivated throughout my life. I knew Carla and Robert underestimated how deep the mine of information I could reach was, and how much my critical eye could unravel subtly maneuvering within the numbers. They expected me to be defeated, for this turf to no longer be mine. But at that moment, it was clear to me. The game was just beginning. I would use every piece, every hidden hope, to turn every piece of this chessboard to my advantage. Because, in the end, behind the rivalry, the rancor, and the sabotage, one thing was certain. I knew exactly whose turf it was, and I wouldn't hesitate to defend it with the discipline and coolness only someone forged in the art of forensic accounting could exert. The silence of the room, lit only by the steady glow of the monitor, created an almost therapeutic environment, where I delved deeper into the essence of the numbers to find what they hid. I was facing a greater challenge than I had imagined, a carefully constructed scheme, with tortuous lines that only in-depth analysis could reveal. I used advanced methods, such as financial fractal analysis, to detect repetitive patterns and anomalies that escaped the usual eye. Each curve, each outlier, bore a silent signature of those who believed they had fooled me. What seemed like a disconnected tangle began to reveal itself as a perverse logic. Shell companies interconnected by disguised transfers, accounts in tax havens, and documents manipulated in sync to disperse any immediate suspicion. I knew I couldn't act alone, and with utmost caution, I began sharing information only with trusted allies, colleagues who demonstrated integrity and discernment. They discreetly answered the silent call, understanding that this game demanded secrecy and precision. The respect earned over the years was the key to forming this secure base, which could help me dismantle the articulation behind the sabotage. The closest collaborators, previously silent or reluctant, began to show apprehension. Small gestures, pauses in conversation, sudden changes in behavior indicated that the network favoring Carla and Robert was beginning to waver as they perceived the advancement of my work. They knew I wasn't an ordinary adversary. This process demanded an exhaustive investigation, night after night, compiling and cross-referencing data. I traveled through the universe of financial behavior. Transfers at unusual hours, transaction volumes incompatible with the routine flow, poorly made attempts to mask transfers through simulated interest or third-party current accounts. These digital clues, imperceptible to most, were undeniable evidence to me. Over time, the fraud picture became clearer. It wasn't an isolated act, but a complex and structured scheme involving hidden allies inside and outside the organization. Mapping this web of relationships was crucial to facing this battle. Each new connection revealed was one step closer to the truth, one untied knot in the conspiratorial plot. I knew that any misstep on my part could compromise everything. Losing evidence, alerting the saboteurs, or even being criminally accused could be fatal. Therefore, I maintained rigorous document control, with protected backups and measures to preserve the confidentiality of the information. My retaliation needed to be perfect, inaccessible to enemy defenses. The awareness of responsibility weighed heavily, but it also strengthened me. The loneliness of the investigation was compensated by the conviction acquired throughout my career. Nothing surpasses the power of solid evidence and technical analysis. With each sleepless night, the dossier grew, not only to prove the fraud, but to restore my reputation. Meanwhile, I followed Carla and Robert's steps, observing their arrogance, the confident demeanor of those who never imagined their plot would be undone with such precision. Little did they know that I was at the heart of this silent confrontation, equipped to reverse each attack with the same coolness they were trying to overwhelm me with. The feeling I had was of being ahead of a master game. Each detected pattern showed me that, contrary to their expectations, I had not only discovered the blow, but was prepared to anticipate moves, blocking defenses, and paving the way for their defeat. More than a professional process, this battle had become personal. The justice I sought wasn't born of revenge, but of the exactitude of the facts, of the irrefutable exposure of the truth. It was my territory, the space I built with effort and competence, which would not be taken with impunity. Thus, involved in this universe of numbers, strategies, and silent corporate wars, I prepared myself for what would come next. I knew there were still stages to cross, and that the game was far from over. But firm in my resolve and armed with the precision of accounting, I was ready to turn every piece of this chessboard to my advantage. The complexity of the scheme only increased as I delved deeper into the analysis. Each new connection discovered was like a thread that, carefully pulled, revealed a more vast and intricate tangle than I had initially imagined. The cross-relations between companies carried almost emblematic information. Synchronized transfers, fictitious contracts endorsed by forged documents, financial movements intentionally lost in layers of shell organizations. It was a puzzle that required not only technical precision, but also creativity and persistence to map and overcome the layers of protection built by the antagonists. To deepen this investigation, I reactivated old contacts, experienced financial consultants I'd known since the early years of my career. People who, because of their discretion and ethics, were capable of interpreting the data with an outside and sometimes more dispassionate perspective. They helped confirm my suspicions, offering valuable insights into typical strategies used in corporate fraud of this level. These confidential conversations served as a compass to guide the next steps of the work, avoiding pitfalls and encouraging intelligent approaches. I combined complex calculations with sharp projections and deductions. Using the full arsenal of forensic accounting tools became indispensable. Statistical analysis to detect significant deviations, IP and server tracking to monitor access to key documents, verification of digital signatures, and authentication of records. Each method confirmed the evidence I had been gathering and helped consolidate an incontestable narrative that transcended suspicion. and reached the raw truth. Carla and Robert, although aware that something was underway, hesitated in the face of my determination. They knew I wasn't just dealing with superficial information, but with evidence built on solid foundations, capable of exposing the extent of the hidden crimes. Their game, which had previously seemed surrounded by impunity, began to crumble from the inside out. The feeling that accompanied me was that of being closer and closer to reaching the core of the conspiracy. It was crucial to ensure that my investigation wasn't interrupted. To that end, I implemented digital security mechanisms that protected the documents and data on isolated servers, far from the reach of the adversaries. Information security was as vital as the analysis of the numbers themselves. A failure could mean the loss of all the work, or worse, the theft of information that would give them the advantage of effective retaliation. This deeper phase of the investigation was tiring, not only because of the technical load, but also because of the emotional toll the situation imposed. I developed an iron discipline to control my emotions, maintain focus, and avoid distractions. Physical fatigue, doubts, and worries tried to infiltrate, but my mind remained a fortress, warm in determination, implacable in execution. Observing the cross-referenced records carefully, I noticed the involvement of at least 2 more people who, until then, hadn't been considered direct protagonists of the plot, discreet but essential accomplices. They were collaborators who, out of self-interest or fear, were helping to perpetuate the scheme. Recognizing these names in the documents was a shock, but at the same time, it confirmed that the web was even larger and more complex than I could have imagined. This expanded knowledge required an adjustment in strategy. It wasn't enough to simply identify the fraud. I needed to understand the motivations and interpersonal dynamics between these individuals to assemble a dossier that not only unmasked them, but also prevented defensive and counteroffensive strategies. With this in mind, I also expanded the investigation to parallel situations, recorded conversations, suspicious meetings, communications via email, and instant messages. That's where my training combined with technology to create a complete picture. Nothing was beyond my analytical reach. Information was my map, and my deductions were the trail that would guide me to the final exposure. Carla, who always seemed confident in her actions, now seemed to hesitate in her public movements. Robert, even trying to maintain composure, showed a disturbing restlessness. It was perceptible that the cards were being revealed, and I was about to play my last hand. This period immersed in work was a testament to my resilience. I rediscovered values from my youth, when nothing was easy. But the desire to win was greater than any obstacle. Each piece of data collected, each revealed transaction pattern, gave me the strength to continue. Although I felt the pressure of an inevitable confrontation, I prepared myself silently for the moment of truth. My weapons weren't aggression, but solid knowledge. The rigor of the method, the patience honed over years, and the clarity of vision became the tools to inaugurate the takedown of the stab in the dark they had attempted. All these elements fit together to form a web that, when pulled, would bring down the structure built by Carla, Robert, and their allies. And I, as an expert, knew exactly where to apply force. It was the apex of the struggle, the moment the game changed, and I was ready. Facing the documents piled on my desk again, I felt the crushing weight of the plot I was unraveling. What initially seemed like simple sabotage had become an intricate and arrogant case of corporate collusion and personal betrayal. Carla and Robert had masterminded a strategic blow, sophisticated and meticulously planned to destabilize me profoundly, not only professionally, but also personally. The scope of the scheme went far beyond classic financial deviations. I was facing a network of manipulations and fictitious accounts, falsified contracts, and a web of shell companies interconnected by hidden transfers. Each movement had been designed to appear legitimate to the casual observer, but it was a house of cards, vulnerable to the trained eye and the patient analysis I had conducted with such determination. I mentally relived my entire career, seeking strength in the victories and lessons that had shaped me. This retrospective was not just a nostalgic exercise. It was a shield against the storm I faced, I wouldn't be brought down by arrogance or dirty tricks. My battle would be legitimate, based on evidence, logic, and the technical rigor my profession demands. The dossier I compiled was a work of impeccable precision. Carefully numbered forged contracts, fabricated accounting records showing illegal transactions, manipulated bank statements, everything meticulously gathered and organized to present a narrative that would crush the facade built by Carla and Robert. These documents didn't just prove the crime, they defined the magnitude of the betrayal. The role of each antagonist became crystal clear during the investigation. Carla, skilled at manipulating people, used her influence to create an environment conducive to fraud. She had strategic contacts inside and outside the company capable of altering or suppressing sensitive information. Robert, in turn, knew the technical intricacies and used this expertise to dismantle systems, create operational confusion, and hide traces. The excellent synergy between them made them formidable, like two gears in a shadowy machine. But that wasn't all. In the flow of the game, I noticed the actions of a third conspirator, Charles, a former partner, whose envy and resentment over my refusal of a relationship transformed into silent sabotage. He operated behind the scenes to sow confusion and discredit my investigation, acting as an additional saboteur that further complicated the network of opposing interests. This dangerous triangle formed the heart of the plot. Carla orchestrated, Robert executed, and Charles sabotaged actions from within the system. Understanding this dynamic allowed me not only to map the crimes, but also to anticipate moves, predict possible defensive lines, and prepare countermeasures to keep the pressure on them. My technical knowledge combined with a detailed profile of each one drew a strategy that would leave no loopholes. I gathered information ranging from financial transactions to intercepted conversations and emails. Technology was an indispensable ally in this phase, allowing me to build a detailed panel of the acts, which added up to an irrefutable set of evidence. With the facts before me, I planned the moment of revelation. I knew that haste could ruin everything, that a disorganized exposure would give leeway to manipulations and evasive speeches. Therefore, I opted for a methodical process, promoting the exposure of the evidence in a clear sequence that would dismantle the defendant's narrative and ensure that the truth would prevail without noise. I faced the tension of the inevitable moment with the rigor that defined me. Revenge wasn't the motive, but justice, the central piece of my entire journey. I was patient. I needed to keep my composure intact to ensure that each accusation was well-founded, each step planned to be definitive. On the day of the meeting, the air was heavy, an atmosphere charged with an uncomfortable silence that precedes the storm. As I presented piece after piece, the look of those present changed. Carla faced the evidence with a rare expression of bewilderment. The almost always owner of the game, now cornered in the face of the clear demonstration of her machinations. Robert tried to mount some defense, but the evidence spoke louder than any words. The emptiness of the silence that followed was as eloquent as any statement. The conspirators' arrogance melted under the weight of transparency. There were no explosive celebrations after the victory. That wasn't my style. What I felt was a calm and resolute satisfaction that came from the certainty that my patience, hard work, and technical precision had prevailed. They tried to shake me, thought that they would sideline me, but they didn't remember my foundation. They forgot this was my turf. The repercussions spread. My name, which they tried to tarnish, was restored with amplified force. Consultants and market professionals began to look at me with respect, recognizing that competence and ethics are invincible when well employed. That turf, which had swayed so many times, was secure again. Carla, Robert, and Charles faced not only the wrath of justice, but also ostracism in their careers and reputations. Their downfall wasn't a mere punishment, but the natural consequence of choices based on betrayal. I knew that victory had required more than technique. It had required heart, patience, and an implacable mind to resist and win. And there, at that moment, with justice finally underway, I confirmed to myself that this was the art of retaliation, the perfect combination of the coldness of calculation and the passion for truth. The turf that was mine, by right, was finally consolidated. It was confirmation that the net was closing, their strategy crumbling, and justice inexorably approaching. Nothing here was accidental. My apparent calm hid a mind on high alert, controlling every detail of this execution, ensuring no element was underestimated. Technique was my most powerful ally. It was the culmination of my persistence, my expertise, and my ability to keep the strategy intact despite internal and external pressures. After the meeting ended, the feeling wasn't euphoria, but a heavy satisfaction. That of someone who knows they've accomplished the mission with excellence and that the path to reparation was open. The invisible battle had been won with the most effective weapons I know: knowledge, patience, and justice. Carla, who had used her charm and influence to weave her webs of manipulation, was caught in her own numerical trap. The lack of arguments and her dejected expression made it clear to everyone present that she had underestimated my capacity and reach. Robert, removed from the spotlight and without the power associated with his previous position, saw his reputation crumble like a sandcastle exposed to a storm. The immediate consequences were measured: preventive suspensions, thorough investigations by the administrative board, external audits called in to ensure integrity and transparency. The consultants, previously hesitant and silent, now clearly supported my work. A feeling of respect and admiration was reinstated around my name, restoring a reputation tarnished by slander and attempted sabotage. However, the victory also came at an emotional cost. The growing distance between my family and me became evident, like a heavy silence filling gaps previously occupied by affection and confidences. Carla, my own sister, became more than a professional rival, an enemy in the field where I needed protection most. This reality hurt more than any external attack. However, my mission wasn't just personal, it was also professional and ethical. The successful execution of the plan relied on the silent, yet essential collaboration of people who believed in me and the justice of my work. Each report, each collaboration between departments reinforced the importance of the fraud prevention system and internal controls. The work environment, which had previously breathed tension, slowly began to feel the fresh breeze of renewal. It became clear that my approach, cold, methodical, and rigorous, had no room for errors and uncontrolled emotions. I had transformed my feelings into discipline and strategy. And this ability is what kept me firm even when the path seemed too arduous to continue. Every decision made, every calculated step, was an act of resistance that propelled me to victory. While Carla attempted to rebuild her crumbling empire, Robert faced questioning, not only from those who were once his subordinates, but also from the competent authorities who now had access to the obtained evidence. Charles, the third element of this plot, quickly found himself without the protection of former allies, isolated and without answers, confronted with the clarity of the truth I had extracted. In the wake of the consequences, the company underwent a restructuring process, aiming to implement stricter control and prevention mechanisms. My reputation, although marked by difficult moments, emerged stronger than ever. My voice was heard not only as an expert, but as an example of integrity and resilience. I felt then that the journey of reconstruction I had been leading was finally bearing concrete fruit. It was no longer just about putting out fires, but about building robust structures that would prevent future abuses. The painful experience became the basis for a new standard of work and ethics in the company, a legacy I wished to leave. After intense months of silent struggle, reflection, and careful planning, I was finally able to feel a renewal. A mixture of relief and the certainty that, on that battlefield, I had won a victory that transcended the professional realm. I had won back myself, my space, and the respect I deserve. But this war wasn't just mine. It was a sign for all who live in the shadow of injustice and betrayal. The truth, when well armed, always finds its way. The art of retaliation is not reckless vengeance. It is justice planned with rigor and courage. As time moved on and the dust settled, I kept my gaze firm. The ground, at last, was mine again, and I was ready to defend every inch of it. The silence that hung in the air of the meeting room that morning was unlike anything I had ever experienced in that process. It wasn't just the typical silence before the start of a discussion. It was a calm, charged with tension, the feeling that something definitive was about to happen. After months, perhaps years, of investigations, allegations, resistance, and attacks, I was ready to face the moment that could seal the entire journey I had undertaken. Every movement, every word, every document displayed before those attentive eyes carried the weight of the truth I had silently constructed. The frauds, the manipulations, the conspiracy orchestrated by Carla, Robert, and Charles were no longer doubts or assumptions. They were concrete facts, supported by clear evidence and irrefutable proof. Finally, justice didn't depend on my word, but on a solid chain of facts. Around me, I perceived the tense gazes of people who, for so long, had been divided between doubt and faith. Some, until then undecided, now showed surprise and even embarrassment at the magnitude of the betrayal revealed. Carla, who throughout the meeting had tried to maintain an impenetrable posture, showed for the first time signs of weakness. The sparkle in her eyes, once confidently dominant, cast shadows and wavered between contained anger and irrepressible fear. Robert could barely maintain eye contact. The arrogance that had been his shield for many years now dripped down the silent walls of the room. At one point, I witnessed an involuntary gesture. His hands trembled as he faced the documents and screens that proved his manipulations. It was the moment of truth, and it weighed more than he could bear. As for me, I maintained my composure. Firm, serene, with a voice that didn't waver, I guided those present through that labyrinth of evidence, showing each step that led me to that point. I didn't need to personally attack. The numbers, reports, intercepts, and calculations spoke with the eloquence of implacable justice. With each conclusion, I felt as if I were untying the last knots of the web, releasing a force that had until then lain hidden. The ground, my turf, began to rise again with a solid foundation. It felt like the final battle, the apex where everything could be decided. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Words silenced, gestures ceased, and even the air seemed heavy with the weight of the revelations. It was in this silence that I understood that the fate of that space and my professional life now rested in the hands of those who, from then on, would bear the weight of their gazes and judgments. And then came the decisions, swift and firm as arrows. Counterattacks or defenses would be useless in the face of the force of that evidence. Carla, Robert, and Charles were sidelined, their presence little more than a shadow of what they represented, powerless in the face of the collapse caused by my calculated and planned retaliation. At that moment, I let go of any feelings of revenge. The battle wasn't against people, but against the injustice they had tried to establish. My victory lay in the restoration of order, in the reaffirmation that the ground was always mine, earned through hard work, patience, and intelligence. I left the room not with a light heart, but with the unwavering conviction of someone who knows their worth and isn't shaken by passing storms. The physical and emotional battle had reached its climax, and from it would emerge a new era, for me and for the company. The climax wasn't the ephemeral explosion of triumph, but the solidity of the firm ground beneath my feet. And it was in that moment that I realized that, however turbulent the trajectory, it was I who would decide the course from then on, with a firm gaze and the certainty that the path traveled had strengthened every subsequent step. I was back, stronger, more prepared, more invincible in the art of retaliation.